Welcome back to Everyday English Pod. We're always looking for ways to help you level up your skills, and today, we're tackling something that's essential for pretty much any job you can think of.
Absolutely. We're talking critical thinking. It's one of those things everyone says is important. But honestly, how often do we actually break down what it means? Especially in the context of our work.
Right. So we've been looking at this discussion about critical thinking in a business environment, and honestly, there are some real gems in there, things that can help you come up with better ideas, spot potential issues before they become big problems, even just communicate more clearly.
One of the first things that jumped out at me from this discussion was how critical thinking is really at the heart of innovation. You might think innovation is all about that initial brainstorm, the big aha moment.
Yeah, you'd think so, right?
But what they really emphasize here is that critical thinking is what takes those raw, exciting ideas and turns them into something that can actually work. It's about asking those tough questions.
Like, wait a minute, are we sure about this?
Exactly. Are we just making assumptions? Could there be something we're missing? Because if we don't stop and really dig into those assumptions, we might end up solving the wrong problem.
Have you ever been in a meeting where someone presents an idea and everyone's just nodding along? Nobody's really pushing back, asking those harder questions.
Oh, all the time. And this discussion really highlighted that. It's so easy for things to slip through the cracks if we don't make a conscious effort to question them. And that's where being able to ask really good, incisive questions comes in.
Right. And it's not about being contrary or trying to shoot down every idea. It's about
making sure we're considering every angle. It might even open up new possibilities we hadn't thought of before.
Which brings up another key point from the discussion. The importance of perspective. It's so easy to get stuck in our own way of looking at things,
Oh, absolutely. We all have our biases, our usual patterns of thinking. But this discussion really emphasized how crucial it is to step outside those comfort zones.
So how do we actually do that? How do we change our perspective in a way that actually helps us think more clearly?
Well, it starts with consciously making the effort. It's like saying, okay, I know I tend to approach things from this angle. What if I tried looking at it from, say, a marketing perspective, or maybe even from the customer's point of view?
So it's like putting on different hats and seeing how the problem looks from each angle.
Exactly. And sometimes that shift in perspective can be really illuminating. You might spot a potential problem you didn't see before, or it might spark a totally new idea.
Now, for those of us who like a little more structure, the discussion also mentions some specific tools and techniques that can help with critical thinking. Things like mind mapping or the 5 whys technique. Could you give us a quick rundown of one of those?
Sure. Let's take the 5 whys, for example. It's deceptively simple, but it's really powerful for getting to the root of a problem. Basically, when something goes wrong, you ask why. Okay, why did that happen? And then whatever the answer is, you ask why again. You keep digging deeper, asking why at each step, ideally for 5 rounds.
So you keep peeling back the layers.
Exactly. And by the time you've asked why 5 times, you're usually much closer to the underlying cause of the problem, not just the surface level symptoms. And that's crucial for coming up with effective solutions.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, the discussion also touched on something that I think is really fascinating, how our emotions can influence our thinking. Sometimes we like to think we're being completely logical and rational.
But let's be honest, none of us are robots. Our emotions definitely play a role, and this discussion acknowledged that. In fact, they argued that relying solely on cold, hard logic can actually be a disadvantage. Our gut feelings, our intuition, those can be valuable too. The key, it seems, is finding the balance. How do we weigh those gut feelings against the facts, the data, the evidence?
And that's a real art, isn't it? To use both your head and your heart in making decisions.
It is. And I think that's where a lot of the truly innovative, creative solutions come from, when we manage to blend that intuitive side with solid logical reasoning. But, it's one thing to have a team full of people who are good at thinking critically on their own. But how do you create an environment where everyone feels comfortable sharing those thoughts, especially if they're going against the grain?
That's where the whole idea of diverse input and open debate comes in, right?
Absolutely. Encouraging different viewpoints is critical because it's the best defense against groupthink. That phenomenon where everyone just goes along with the dominant opinion, even if deep down they have doubts.
Oh, yeah. Nobody wants to rock the boat.
Exactly. And the discussion really emphasized how dangerous that can be. Because when everyone just agrees for the sake of harmony, you end up with decisions that might not be the best. Open debate, even when it feels a little uncomfortable, actually leads to better outcomes.
But you need the right kind of environment for that, right? People need to feel safe speaking up.
Absolutely. And that starts at the top. Leadership plays a huge role in fostering this kind of critical thinking culture.
So what does that look like? What kind of leader is good at fostering this kind of open, questioning environment?
Well, they emphasize that effective leaders in this context are those who modeled critical thinking themselves. They're not afraid to admit when they've made a mistake. They actively seek out feedback, even if it's critical. They really value those different perspectives.
So it's about creating a culture where it's okay to question things, to challenge assumptions, even at the highest level.
Exactly. And that goes hand in hand with nurturing a culture of questioning throughout the organization, where people aren't afraid to ask stupid questions, where curiosity is valued.
Right, because sometimes those stupid questions are the ones that uncover something really important that everyone else missed.
They really can be. And the discussion contrasted that kind of environment with one where people are afraid to speak up, afraid of looking foolish. And that kind of fear just stifles creativity and progress. When people are worried about being judged, they hold back and you miss out on potentially valuable insights.
So encouraging thoughtful questioning is essential, but that probably takes time and effort to build.
Oh, absolutely. You can't just snap your fingers and create a culture of critical thinking. It's an ongoing process, It takes consistent effort from everyone, especially leadership. You have to keep reinforcing these behaviors, creating opportunities for people to practice critical thinking.
Speaking of practice, the discussion also highlighted the value of looking at case studies. Real-world examples of how other organizations or individuals have tackled complex problems.
That's such a powerful learning tool. You get to see critical thinking in action, analyze different approaches, understand what worked and what didn't, and then ideally you can take those lessons and apply them to your own situations.
So it's like learning from the mistakes and successes of others.
Exactly. And that can be invaluable for avoiding common pitfalls and coming up with more effective solutions.
Now, one other key element of critical thinking that came up in the discussion was the importance of data literacy. Being able to understand and interpret data.
Especially in today's world, right?
Yeah.
We're just inundated with data, and if you can't make sense of it, you're at a real disadvantage. Critical thinking hinges on being able to base your decisions on solid evidence, and that means being data literate.
But it's not just about crunching numbers. It's about being able to see the story the data is telling. What does it really mean? And are we sure we're interpreting it correctly?
Exactly. And the discussion pointed out that we also need to be open to revising our conclusions if new data comes to light.
So it's about being data-driven, but also flexible.
Precisely. Because the world is constantly changing and new information is always emerging. A critical thinker needs to be able to adapt.
And that ties into the idea of regularly reviewing and assessing our strategies, doesn't it? Making sure we're still on the right track.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's so easy to just set a plan in motion and then assume it's going to work perfectly. But taking the time to step back, reassess, look for any inconsistencies or areas where our initial assumptions might no longer be valid, that can be incredibly valuable.
That's a course correction.
Exactly. Those regular check-ins can help us avoid major problems down the road. But you know what else can be really important and surprisingly difficult for a lot of organizations?
What's that?
Challenging long-standing practices. Just because something has been done a certain way for a long time doesn't mean it's still the best way.
Oh, yeah. The we've always done it this way trap.
Exactly. And the discussion emphasized how important it is to be willing to question those traditions, to ask why things are done the way they are. Because sometimes there's a much better way out there just waiting to be discovered.
So after this deep dive into critical thinking, what's the main message you hope our listeners take away from this?
I think the most important takeaway from the discussion is this. Critical thinking isn't just a skill set you learn once and then check off your list. It's a mindset. It's a way of approaching everything you do with curiosity, with a willingness to question, to dig deeper.
So it's not just about what you think, but how you think.
Exactly. And that's what really allows you to adapt, to grow, to excel in whatever you do.
Well said. So to recap, we've explored a lot of different facets of critical thinking today. The importance of questioning assumptions, the power of perspective, the value of structured tools and techniques, and even the role our emotions play.
We've also talked about the importance of fostering an environment of open communication and debate, the role of leadership in creating that environment, and the need for consistent effort in developing these skills.
We also touched on the value of learning from case studies, the crucial importance of data literacy, the benefits of regularly assessing our strategies, and the need to challenge long-held practices.
And ultimately, it all comes back to that core idea. Critical thinking is a mindset, a way of engaging with the world that can truly transform the way you work and the results you achieve.
Now, as we wrap up, we want to leave you with a question to ponder. Of all the elements of critical thinking we've discussed today, which one resonates most with you? What's one specific action you can take to cultivate a more critical and questioning approach in your own work or within your team?
That's a great question to reflect on. Thanks for joining us for this session of Everyday English Pod.
We hope these insights help you think smarter and communicate more effectively in your professional life. See you next time.